Long before the flashing lights, roaring crowds, and the blaring rhythms of chart-topping hits, Robert Sylvester Kelly was just another boy from the south side of Chicago. Born on January 8, 1967, in a modest and struggling household, R. Kelly's early years were a mixture of hardship and fleeting moments of joy. His mother, Joanne Kelly, was a devout churchgoer and a singer in the local Baptist choir. She often brought young Robert along, where the echoing hymns and the resonance of her soulful voice planted the seeds of his passion for music. Robert grew up in a cramped apartment that he shared with his mother, siblings, and a rotating cast of relatives who sought refuge in their home. His father was absent, a shadowy figure whose name was rarely spoken. This absence left a void in Robert's life, one that he would struggle to fill throughout his journey. Despite the harsh realities of his environment, Robert showed an early interest in creative expression. As a child, he would often mimic the melodies he heard in church or on the old radio his mother cherished. His siblings teased him about his off-key singing, but his mother always defended him, saying, "Robert, you've got something special. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Life in the South Side was a constant battle against poverty and violence. The neighborhood was rife with gangs, drugs, and an ever-present sense of danger. Joanne worked tirelessly as a schoolteacher, but her modest salary could barely cover their needs. Robert's older brother, Bruce, often took on odd jobs to help make ends meet, while his younger siblings depended heavily on their mother's care. Robert was a quiet, introspective child who often found solace in music and drawing. However, his childhood was marred by traumatic experiences that he kept hidden from everyone. These events would later be revealed as the foundation of his troubled psyche, shaping the man he would become. School was another area of struggle. Diagnosed with an undiagnosed learning disability, Robert found reading and writing difficult. He was often bullied by his peers and teachers who mistook his quiet demeanor for laziness. However, Robert discovered a refuge in his school's music program, where his natural talent began to shine. Robert's life changed dramatically one Sunday morning at church. Joanne had encouraged him to join the choir, and though he was reluctant, she insisted. "You've got a voice that deserves to be heard, Robert. Don't hide it," she told him. That morning, as the congregation swayed to the rhythms of the organ, Robert stepped forward to sing a solo. His voice, raw but undeniably powerful, filled the room. The church fell silent, captivated by the sound of a boy whose voice seemed to carry the weight of his struggles. After the service, an elderly choir director named Mr. James approached Joanne. "Your boy has a gift," he said. "With the right guidance, he could go far." Joanne, ever supportive of her son's dreams, allowed Mr. James to mentor Robert, teaching him how to harness and refine his voice. As Robert grew older, he began performing at local events and talent shows, slowly gaining recognition in the neighborhood. His unique ability to blend gospel, soul, and R&B styles set him apart from other young singers. Despite his academic struggles, music became the one area where Robert excelled, and it gave him a sense of purpose. But life at home remained difficult. Joanne's health began to decline, and with mounting medical bills, the family's financial situation worsened. Robert often took on small jobs to help his mother, but his real focus was on his music. He believed that his voice was the key to lifting his family out of poverty. One fateful night, at a local talent show, Robert performed a song he had written. The small crowd erupted in applause, and for the first time, he felt the thrill of recognition. A local music producer in the audience approached him afterward, offering to help him record a demo. As Robert walked home that night, clutching the producer's business card, he couldn't help but dream of a brighter future. But within him, the scars of his past lingered, whispering doubts and fears. Would he succeed? Could he escape the shadows of his upbringing? What he didn't know was that this moment marked the beginning of a journey that would take him to unimaginable heights and, eventually, unimaginable depths. The leap from obscurity to recognition was not immediate. For Robert, the journey required grit, determination, and the ability to navigate a world that often felt stacked against him. After that fateful night at the talent show, he spent weeks trying to contact the local producer who had given him a business card. Eventually, Robert's persistence paid off, and he was invited to a small recording studio on the outskirts of Chicago. The studio was far from glamorous, with creaky floors and outdated equipment, but for Robert, it felt like a palace. He recorded his first demo there, a soulful ballad that showcased his vocal range and raw emotion. The producer, a middle-aged man named Terry Mitchell, saw potential in Robert. "You've got something special, kid," Terry told him. "But talent alone ain't enough. You've got to work harder than everyone else." Terry introduced Robert to the grind of the music industry. He spent long hours in the studio, refining his sound and writing new songs. He also learned the harsh realities of the business. Producers demanded results, and competition was fierce. To make ends meet, Robert worked odd jobs during the day and recorded at night. During this time, Robert joined a local R&B group, hoping to gain more exposure. The group, known as MGM, Musically Gifted Men, performed at small clubs and community events. They were far from famous, but the experience gave Robert a taste of performing for a live audience. His powerful voice and commanding stage presence quickly made him the standout member of the group. Yet, setbacks were frequent. Record labels showed little interest in the group's music, and rejection letters became a common sight. Robert, however, remained undeterred. "One day they'll see," he often told himself. In the summer of 1989, Robert's life took a dramatic turn. While performing at a downtown club, he caught the attention of an executive from Jive Records, a label known for producing R&B stars. The executive, Barry Weiss, was captivated by Robert's voice and stage presence. After the show, Barry approached him with an offer to discuss a recording contract. For Robert, this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. The meeting with Jive Records was nerve-wracking, but his passion and talent shone through. Barry Weiss was impressed enough to sign him to the label, though it was clear that Robert would have to prove himself. Jive Records decided to market Robert as a solo artist. The first project was an album titled Born into the 90s, which he worked on tirelessly with a team of producers and writers. The album, a mix of R&B and New Jack Swing, was released in early 1992 and became an instant success. Tracks like Honey Love and Slow Dance climbed the charts, cementing Robert's status as a rising star. The success of Born into the 90s was a dream come true for Robert. For the first time, he experienced the trappings of fame: radio interviews, television appearances, and adoring fans. He could finally afford to move his family out of the South Side and into a better neighborhood, fulfilling a promise he had made to his mother. With fame came new challenges. Robert struggled to adjust to life in the spotlight, where every move was scrutinized by the media and fans. He was no longer just a boy from Chicago. He was R. Kelly, the R&B sensation. The pressure to maintain his success weighed heavily on him, and he found solace in music, which remained his true passion. Despite his rising fame, Robert remained grounded by his mother, Joanne. She was his biggest supporter, often attending his performances and reminding him of his roots. But tragedy struck in 1993 when Joanne passed away after a battle with cancer. Her death devastated Robert, leaving him heartbroken and adrift. 6. In the wake of his mother's passing, Robert channeled his grief into his music. Later that year, he released 12 Play, an album that would catapult him to superstardom. The album featured hits like Bump and Grind and Your Body's Callan, which became iconic tracks in the R&B genre. By the mid-1990s, R. Kelly was a household name. His smooth vocals, emotional lyrics, and innovative sound earned him widespread acclaim. He became known as the King of R&B, a title he embraced with pride. However, beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. The pressures of fame, unresolved personal traumas, and the temptations of stardom began to take their toll. Robert Sylvester Kelly had achieved what many could only dream of, a meteoric rise from obscurity to fame. But the journey was far from over, and the challenges that lay ahead would test him in ways he could never have imagined. By the mid-1990s, Robert Sylvester Kelly had transcended the status of a rising star to become a certified icon in the music world. His album 12 Play not only dominated the charts, but also solidified his reputation as a pioneer of sensual, emotionally charged R&B. With every hit, he seemed to redefine the boundaries of the genre, crafting songs that resonated deeply with fans around the world. The success of 12 Play was just the beginning. R. Kelly's ability to produce chart-topping tracks was unparalleled, and his collaborations with other artists added to his fame. In 1996, he released I Believe I Can Fly, a song that would become one of his most iconic works. Featured in the movie Space Jam, the track earned him 3 Grammy Awards and cemented his position as a global superstar. Audiences were captivated by the song's uplifting message and soaring melody, which stood in stark contrast to the provocative themes of his earlier work. It showcased a different side of R. Kelly, the inspirational artist who could touch hearts and unite people. By now, R. Kelly was a household name. He performed on the world's biggest stages, from sold-out arenas in the United States to packed venues in Europe and Asia. His concerts were electrifying, filled with elaborate stage setups, backup dancers, and, of course, his powerful voice that could mesmerize an audience. With fame came immense wealth, and R. Kelly embraced the lavish lifestyle that came with it. He purchased sprawling mansions, luxury cars, and private jets. Paparazzi frequently captured him at exclusive parties and high-profile events, often surrounded by celebrities and admirers. However, the fame and fortune also brought challenges. The demands of constant touring and recording left little room for rest. Kelly often found himself in the center of controversies, whether due to disputes with collaborators or rumors about his personal during this period. R. Kelly surrounded himself with a close-knit group of friends, employees, and collaborators who became integral to his career. Among them was Demetrius Smith, a trusted confidant who had been with him since his early days. Demetrius played a key role in managing Kelly's chaotic schedule and shielding him from the darker side of fame. However, this inner circle was not without its complications. While many genuinely supported Kelly, others were drawn to him for his wealth and influence. The loyalty of his entourage would later come into question as controversies began to emerge. R. Kelly's public persona was one of confidence and charm, but those close to him saw a different side. He was a perfectionist in the studio, often working late into the night to achieve the sound he wanted. Music was his escape, a way to process his emotions and cope with the traumas of his past. Behind the scenes, however, Kelly's behavior became increasingly erratic. Friends noticed his mood swings and his tendency to isolate himself. The pressure to maintain his status as the king of R&B weighed heavily on him, and his coping mechanisms often raised eyebrows. Despite these struggles, R. Kelly's career continued to soar. He became one of the most sought-after producers in the music industry, working with artists like Aaliyah, Michael Jackson, and Celine Dion. His ability to craft hits for others while maintaining his solo career was a testament to his talent and work ethic. However, his close relationship with Aaliyah would later become one of the most controversial aspects of his career. Their collaboration on her debut album, Age Ain't Nothing But a Number, was critically acclaimed, but rumors about their personal relationship began to circulate. These rumors were initially dismissed by Kelly's team, but they hinted at deeper issues that would resurface years later. By the late 1990s, R. Kelly was at the pinnacle of his career. His albums consistently went platinum, and his influence on the music industry was undeniable. He was a trendsetter, a pioneer, and a role model to aspiring artists. Yet, amidst the glittering success, cracks in the foundation of his empire were beginning to show. Whispers of misconduct grew louder, and the media began to scrutinize his personal life more closely. For now, however, the world celebrated him as a musical genius, a man whose voice and vision had reshaped the landscape of R&B. But beneath the surface, the seeds of his downfall were being sown, and it was only a matter of time before the world would see the darker side of the man behind the music. By the early 2000s, R. Kelly was more than just a singer. He was an institution, His catalog of hits, spanning soulful ballads to club anthems, made him a staple in the music industry. His name carried weight, and his influence extended beyond his own music to the careers of countless others. But as his fame soared, the complexities of his character began to come to light, revealing a man whose public persona masked a deeply troubled soul. In the studio, R. Kelly was a force to be reckoned with. His sessions were legendary for their intensity and the demands he placed on himself and those around him. Collaborators often spoke of his near-obsessive focus, describing how he would work for days on end to perfect a single track. His ability to craft melodies and harmonies was unmatched, and his talent for writing lyrics that resonated with listeners was nothing short of genius. Yet, this brilliance often came at a cost. Kelly's perfectionism sometimes bordered on tyranny, with heated arguments and abrupt dismissals of anyone who didn't meet his exacting standards. He was known to keep his team on edge, pushing them to their limits in pursuit of his vision. Despite this, those who worked closely with him admired his dedication. "You couldn't deny the man's passion," one producer recalled. "He lived and breathed music. It was his lifeline." Outside the studio, Kelly's life was a study in contradictions. On one hand, he was a charismatic and generous figure, donating to charities, mentoring young artists, and helping his family escape the hardships of their earlier years. On the other, he was a deeply private man who struggled with his inner demons. Kelly's childhood trauma, which he rarely spoke of publicly, had left deep scars. Friends noticed his mood swings, bouts of paranoia, and a tendency to isolate himself from others. He seemed to be constantly at war with himself, torn between the pressures of fame and the unresolved pain of his past. As Kelly's career continued to thrive, his personal life became increasingly complicated. While he was known for his charm and charisma, whispers of questionable behavior began to circulate in the industry. His relationship with Aaliyah, which had been widely speculated upon, was brought into sharp focus when reports emerged that the two had secretly married in 1994, when she was just 15 years old. The news caused a media frenzy, but Kelly's team worked quickly to downplay the situation. The marriage was reportedly annulled, and both Kelly and Aaliyah refused to speak publicly about the matter. However, the incident cast a shadow over Kelly's career, raising questions about his character and judgment. As Kelly's fame grew, so did the allegations against him. Reports of inappropriate behavior with young women began to surface, though they were often dismissed or settled quietly. Kelly's legal team was adept at protecting his image, and his fan base remained fiercely loyal, defending him against any accusations. However, behind closed doors, those close to Kelly began to see a darker side. Former employees and collaborators spoke of his controlling behavior, describing how he maintained strict rules for those in his inner circle. His relationships were often marked by manipulation and power dynamics, painting a picture of a man who used his influence to exert control over others. Despite these growing concerns, Kelly's public image remained largely intact. He continued to release hit albums and perform to sold-out crowds, with fans idolizing him as the king of R&B. His music, which ranged from sensual love songs to uplifting anthems, resonated with millions, allowing him to maintain his status as a cultural icon. But as the years went on, the divide between the public's perception of Kelly and the reality of his personal life grew wider. The cracks in his carefully constructed facade were becoming harder to ignore, and the whispers of misconduct were growing louder. By the mid-2000s, R. Kelly was at the peak of his career, but the signs of his eventual downfall were becoming increasingly apparent. His talent and charisma had brought him to the heights of fame, but his unchecked behavior and the dark secrets of his personal life were beginning to unravel the empire he had built. For now, Kelly remained untouchable, a superstar whose music continued to captivate audiences around the world. But the man behind the music was on a dangerous path, one that would ultimately lead him from the pinnacle of fame to the depths of infamy. By the late 2000s, R. Kelly's dominance in the music industry was undeniable. He had become a symbol of success, With a string of multi-platinum albums, sold-out tours, and a reputation as the king of R&B. Yet, behind the glittering facade, the cracks in his public image were becoming harder to ignore. Whispers of misconduct that had once been dismissed as rumors were now resurfacing with more frequency. The media began to dig deeper, and the stories they uncovered painted a troubling picture of the man behind the music. In 2002, the first major scandal broke. A videotape surfaced allegedly showing R. Kelly engaging in inappropriate acts with an underage girl. The footage, which was widely circulated in media circles, sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry. The allegations led to a criminal investigation, and Kelly was charged with multiple counts of child pornography. The trial, which began in 2008, became a media spectacle. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, fans rallied in support of Kelly, and public opinion became sharply divided. Throughout the trial, Kelly maintained his innocence. His defense team argued that he was the victim of extortion and that the tape was doctored. His fans, many of whom were fiercely loyal, stood by him, buying his albums and attending his concerts in droves. After a lengthy trial, Kelly was acquitted of all charges in 2008. The verdict was met with mixed reactions. While some saw it as vindication, others viewed it as a failure of the justice system. Despite the acquittal, the scandal left a lasting stain on Kelly's reputation. Many in the industry distanced themselves from him, and his career took a hit. Concerts were canceled, sponsorships were pulled, and his album sales declined. In an attempt to rebuild his image, Kelly released Untold in 2009, an album that marked a return to essential R&B roots. The project was moderately successful, with songs like Number One showcasing Kelly's undeniable talent. However, the shadow of the scandal continued to loom over him, and public perception of the artist began to shift. The music landscape was changing rapidly with the rise of digital platforms and new genres. For Kelly, who had built his career in the era of CDs and radio play, staying relevant required constant reinvention. He collaborated with younger artists, experimented with new sounds, and continued to tour extensively. Yet, the controversy surrounding him made it increasingly difficult to maintain his position at the top. Media outlets and advocacy groups called for boycotts of his music, arguing that his success allowed him to evade accountability for his actions. Throughout these turbulent years, Kelly's inner circle remained largely intact. Many of his closest associates, including longtime manager Daryl McDavid, stood by him, working tirelessly to protect his image and manage his career. However, cracks were beginning to form within his team as well. Some former employees began to speak out, sharing stories of Kelly's controlling behavior and the lengths to which they went to cover up his alleged misconduct. These revelations added fuel to the fire, further tarnishing Kelly's reputation. In the years following the trial, new allegations surfaced, many of them echoing the claims that had been made during the court case. Women came forward with accounts of manipulation, abuse, and exploitation, painting a picture of a man who used his power and influence to prey on the vulnerable. While Kelly's legal team dismissed these claims as attempts to extort money from him, the growing chorus of voices was hard to ignore. Activists and journalists began to investigate the allegations more thoroughly, uncovering disturbing patterns of behavior that had been overlooked or dismissed for years. By the early 2010s, public opinion had begun to shift dramatically. The rise of social media platforms allowed victims to share their stories directly, bypassing traditional media outlets. Hashtags like #MuteRKelly gained traction, with fans and critics alike calling for accountability. Despite the mounting criticism, Kelly continued to perform and release music. His die-hard fans remained loyal, attending his shows and defending him against detractors. For them, his music was separate from the man, and they refused to let the allegations tarnish their love for his work. While Kelly's career had weathered scandals before, the tide was beginning to turn. The public, once willing to overlook his personal life in favor of his talent, was growing less forgiving. Activists, journalists, and former collaborators were united in their calls for justice, and the walls around Kelly's carefully constructed empire were starting to crumble. The man who had once been untouchable was now on borrowed time. The question was no longer if his reckoning would. The cracks in R. Kelly's public image, long patched over by loyal fans, a robust legal team, and industry power, finally began to widen into an irreparable chasm by the mid-2010s. What had been a career defined by musical genius and cultural influence was now overshadowed by a growing chorus of voices demanding accountability. The man who had once stood as the king of R&B was now facing an onslaught of allegations, investigations, and public outrage that would bring his empire crashing down. In 2017, BuzzFeed News published an explosive article alleging that R. Kelly was running a sex cult. The report claimed that he had manipulated and abused young women, keeping them in his home under strict rules and cutting them off from their families. Former associates and parents of the alleged victims came forward, detailing stories of coercion and control. The article was a tipping point. Advocacy groups reignited the hashtag #MuteRKelly campaign, calling for radio stations to stop playing his music and for concert venues to cancel his shows. For the first time, the industry began to respond. Concerts were boycotted, sponsors pulled out, and streaming platforms like Spotify and Apple Music faced pressure to remove his music. While some fans continued to defend him, the tide of public opinion was shifting rapidly. The turning point in R. Kelly's downfall came in January 2019 with the release of the docuseries Surviving R. Kelly. Over 6 episodes, survivors, former employees, and industry insiders shared their harrowing accounts of Kelly's alleged abuse. The stories were raw, detailed, and impossible to ignore. The series sparked a national conversation about abuse, power, and the complicity of those who enabled Kelly for decades. It also prompted law enforcement to take a closer look at the allegations against him. For many viewers, the documentary was a moment of reckoning. It forced them to confront the dark side of an artist they had idolized for years. The voices of the survivors were amplified, and the public's tolerance for Kelly's behavior evaporated. Following the documentary, investigations into Kelly's actions intensified. In February 2019, Kelly was arrested and charged with 10 counts of aggravated criminal sexual abuse involving 4 women, 3 of whom were underage at the time of the alleged incidents. As the case unfolded, more charges were brought against him, including federal charges for racketeering, kidnapping, and violating the Mann Act, which prohibits transporting individuals across state lines for illegal sexual activity. Prosecutors painted a picture of a man who had used his fame and wealth to prey on vulnerable women and girls, luring them into a web of abuse and control. Kelly's defense team denied all allegations, arguing that the relationships were consensual and that the accusers were motivated by financial gain. Kelly's trial began in 2021, drawing global attention. Survivors took the stand, recounting their experiences in vivid detail. The testimonies were heartbreaking, exposing the extent of Kelly's manipulation and the trauma he inflicted on his victims. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence, including videos, text messages, and witness accounts. Kelly's defense attempted to discredit the accusers, but the weight of the evidence was overwhelming. In September 2021, Kelly was found guilty on all counts in his federal trial in New York. He faced decades in prison, marking the end of his reign as one of the biggest names in music. The transition from global superstar to prison inmate was stark. Kelly, once accustomed to private jets and sold-out arenas, now faced the reality of life behind bars. Reports emerged of him struggling to adapt to his new environment, where he was no longer the powerful figure he had been for decades. Fans who had once celebrated his music were divided. While some continued to defend him, many turned away, unable to reconcile the man's actions with the art they had loved. The fall of R. Kelly was a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the complicity of those who enable abusive behavior. It also served as a moment of reckoning for the music industry, forcing it to confront its role in perpetuating a culture of silence and complicity. For the survivors, the verdict was a step toward healing and justice, though the scars of their experiences would remain. Their bravery in coming forward had not only brought Kelly to account, but also inspired countless others to speak out against abuse. The story of R. Kelly, once a tale of triumph over adversity, was now one of squandered talent and unthinkable betrayal. His music, once celebrated for its beauty and emotion, was now tainted by the actions of the man who created it. As the world moved on, Kelly's name became synonymous with infamy. His story was a stark reminder that no amount of fame or fortune could shield someone from the consequences of their actions forever.